We are in a new series called The New I Never Knew, okay? The New That I Never Knew. We are 10 weeks into this new year, 2021, and chances are, if you made a New Year's resolution, you don't even remember it, right? In fact, studies say that a majority of resolutions that are made are broken by January 12th, a majority of them. That by the end of this month, March, 80% of them will be broken, and that only 8% of the people who make New Year's resolutions actually see it realized. 8%. When the clock hit midnight on New Year's Eve, chances are, like me, you were asleep for 2 hours. But that next morning, you probably woke up with a tremendous amount of hope for what you hoped to experience, the new that you hope to experience in this new year. What I've learned about hope is that it makes a great virtue, and it also makes a terrible strategy. During the month of January, a theme in my prayer life and in the prayers I was hearing amongst my friends and you in this church was a passage from Isaiah 43. We'll have it on the screen. It says this: "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." I sensed at the outset of this year in January that God was doing a new thing. And I'm experiencing that now. I've watched him do a new thing in many of your lives, if not all. And he's definitely doing a new thing in my life. And here's my hope for this 3-week series, The New I Never Knew. My hope is that you wouldn't get to the end of 2021 and look back only then to see the new that you never knew. During our series in December, I'm sure you remember it. It was called Oh Holy Night. There was 2 weeks where John and I actually both talked about the soul. And I drew on the diagram how the soul is comprised of 3 parts: our heart, our mind, and also our body. I believe that there are new things for your soul to learn, to know, and to experience this year. But I also know that your heart, your mind, and your body have forces working against it. We'll call them barriers. Barriers between you and the new that God has for you this year. And so today, for week 1, we are going to start with the heart, and we're going to look at the barrier of grief in your heart. Today, we're going to look at the barrier of grief in your heart. In the coming weeks, we'll move out to our mind and to our body. Let me talk about grief for a minute. Grief is, of course, incredibly difficult. Grief is difficult because it is dynamic and it's also delicate. It's dynamic in that we all grieve different things. And not only do we all grieve different things, but we all grieve in different ways. And not only that, but we all grieve these different things different ways on different timelines. Add to that difficulty in the dynamics is that Kathy may grieve something one way, and then she sees me grieving it another way, and then we've got this weird thing, and it just complicates everything about grief. It doesn't make sense. It's very dynamic. It's also very delicate. It's delicate because, of course, of the painful and deep emotions that come with it. Grief is particularly and unexpectedly delicate today. Just less than 24 hours ago, this room was as filled as it is right now with grieving hearts. As we as a church, we celebrated the life, but we also mourned and grieved the life of a loved one in our community. That was very unexpected. And so I just know and want to acknowledge that grief is unexpectedly delicate today. In fact, God put this series and this message on my heart 7 weeks ago, and I never could have seen how timely it was going to be, and I'm just trusting the goodness of God in that. Grief is, of course, most associated with that loss of life. And that very well may be the deepest form of grief, so deep that we can tend to ignore other parts of grief that I believe we experience every day and that every one of us encounter. And so I want to speak to grief, both loss of life, but I want to honor all forms of grief. Some grief might be loss of a friendship. Some grief might be divorce. Some grief might be a relationship that you're still in, but it's just not like it was for so many years. It's just different. Maybe, I know there's some of you in this church, you are empty nesters now, and you never realized how much you would miss having your older kids in the house. You've talked to me about that. I don't know why I'm emotional. I'm not an empty nester, but I feel for you. Some of you are retiring, and that's a good thing, but you forgot you didn't realize how much you were going to miss that purpose of working every day. And so you're happy about retirement, but you need to grieve the loss of that work. Some of you lost a job. You didn't ask to lose it. Some of you moved to a new neighborhood or a new area. I don't know why you would move here, but you did. And you're grieving that sunny, warm place or wherever you came from. Maybe you have a diagnosis in your life that is literally changing the course of your life, and you're grieving what was. I know a lot of people, I have learned, they grieve just simply aging in the new phase of life. I turned 40 this year, and I'm kind of grieving my 30s. When I get up, I kind of go, oh. And Kat to me said, you're too young for that. Well, I'm grieving. High on the list in my research was loss of a pet. I'm grieving the days when my house didn't have a pet. I know. I didn't do that at 9, but I'm glad I did because I needed the room I needed to lighten up a little bit. So, and my wife's not in here right now. And if you think that is all, 2020 added a whole bunch of new stuff. Some of you missed out on your sports season. And if you're a parent, you love being on the sidelines for your kids' sports, and you didn't get to do that. And you're grieving the relationships and the camaraderie that comes with that. A lot of you, I know you missed out on the fullness of your high school. See my nephew over there, your high school and your college experience. You got to grieve that. Now, some of you are new here from another church, which means you need to grieve the loss of your church community. And I know that's not a light thing. Some of you missed that office environment, that camaraderie and teamwork you had with your coworkers. Some of you don't miss it at all, but some of you miss it. You miss that. Some of you, you're grieving the loss of that vacation or 3 that you had planned that you didn't get to take, and simply, we're all grieving just the loss of normal this past year. I know this week last year I was grieving the loss of March Madness, but it's back this week, so go Illini. I heard they're good. Yeah, go Illini. But just so we can all feel like we have common ground that we share, raise your hand if you would say in the last 12 months you experienced some form of loss. Just throw up your hand. Okay, so only 100% of us. Everyone in this room, you are either knowingly grieving, unknowingly grieving, or resisting to grieve. And this grief can and it will be used as a barrier between you and the new that God has for you. The enemy wants to keep you in your grief or keep you from your grief. Because if he can do those two things, he will keep you from the new thing that he has for you. Before we look at a story in the Bible, something that's really important that I need to say, based on what I've learned about grief, is I need you to know that this is not about to be a message about me telling you to move on from your grief. It has nothing to do with that. So often in our attempts to help ourselves and others through grief, there's this undertone. Sometimes it's overt and sometimes it's subvert. This feeling of like, I feel like they want me to move on. That's not this today. But I am asking and praying that by the power of the Holy Spirit, that he will step into your grief and he will reframe your journey through it from move on to move with. From move on to move with. Y'all out there got to stop crying because it's killing me. But actually, keep going. That's part of my message. Let it flow. In John 11, we see the story of Jesus bringing Lazarus back to life. Lazarus is the brother of Mary and Martha. And in this story, we see Jesus step into their grief so that they have the choice to walk with him in their grief. Jesus says 4 particular things that we're going to look at today. These 4 things, they not only show who Jesus is, but they show us what he does with our grief. So we're going to pick up the story in John 11. If you have a Bible, the Bible app, you can get to John 11 and skip down midway through the story. We're going to pick it up in verse 33. Jesus is walking with them to the scene. It says this in verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Where have you laid him? The first thing Jesus does in our grief is he walks with you, okay? He walks with you. Now, before you're like, yeah, I know, that's obvious. Or maybe you're just sick of hearing that he's with you, he's walking with you. You're just tired of hearing that. Just hear me out for a second. When you go on a walk with someone, and you're walking with maybe a friend or a spouse, what is the other primary activity that you are taking part in while walking? Talking. You're talking. You're having a conversation. And the best way to have a conversation or to start a conversation is to ask a question. And I don't know if you've scanned through the gospel account of Jesus, but that seems to be all he does, is ask a question. Jesus is all-knowing, yet he's asking questions all the time that he knows the answers to. And as they're arriving on the scene together, as he's walking with them, he asks, "Where have you laid him? Where have you laid him?" Now, I know for a fact that Jesus is here today. And I wonder if you would invite him to walk with you, whatever that looks like. I wonder if he would ask you today, where does your grief lie? I wonder if he'd ask you, where does your grief lie? He knows the answer, but more importantly, how would you answer? It was just a couple months ago, I re-engaged my friend Randy. I've talked about Randy up here before. For 8 years, I've met with Randy, and he helps me talk to God. He helps me listen to God. He helps me discern what God is doing in my life. And it was just a few minutes into our first conversation of the new year when I realized that I was grieving. I realized what I was grieving, and I realized what I was feeling about my grief, as John alluded to. This weekend, 1 year ago, was the anniversary of what was Mission Church coming to an end. Now, I've said that to some of you before, and you're like, whoa, I mean, that's a big statement. And I've thought a lot about it. I've prayed a lot about it. I've talked a lot about it, and that's what it was, at least for me. It's the end of Mission Church as it was it coming to an end. And I don't know what your experience has been. I know some of you, this is your first time here, and hopefully you're having a great experience. But all that you experience in and through Mission Church didn't just like click into place years ago. It took years of prayer, of working and waiting. I remember thinking at the outset of January 2020 that we could like just step back and take in the fruit of all that God was doing. Like it didn't feel like we had to just work and grind so hard. We had more people in attendance than ever before, more showing up every week, more services than we had ever had. Our growth track had more people on it than we had ever experienced. The Alpha course, our first course, we were told was the largest Alpha gathering in the country we were experiencing here. Yeah. That was then, but yes, thank you for your clapping. We had more people going missionally in missional communities than ever. This gather, grow, go, like engine, it had this thing called momentum until it didn't anymore. And when it didn't, I was thrust unknowingly into grief. And I went into the first stage that we often enter into the first stage, and John alluded to this. I was in the stage of denial. And I was like, this will be like a couple weeks. Let's not overreact, people. 2 weeks, at least Easter, we'll be back. It'll all be back. And then I was like in denial, thinking this is going to this is going to affect our faith. We're going to come back stronger from this, all these things, just to protect myself from what I was feeling, what I felt was unraveling in front of my very eyes. And then I went into the blame stage, which is never helpful, but we do it, and I blamed everyone and everything, including myself. And then I moved into this stage that I was in for a long time. They call it the bargaining stage. It's where we strategize through our grief. And I thought and had become convinced that if I just work and strategize and put something else on the whiteboard that unlocks something, that we will rebuild what was lost and I'll feel better finally. And I did that all summer. And we started in August. You could experience church here online at the building and in watch parties. This is cool and it's good and it's going to continue. And that just came out of me grieving, to be totally honest. It was me just trying to strategize my way to get back what I felt like I had lost. And this is basically what I told Randy in our conversation. I just said, Randy, this is my grief. It's right here. And I want you to know that Jesus today, whatever it is, he's walking with you and he's waiting for you, patiently, by the way. But he's waiting for you to simply lift your hand and point and just say, Jesus, there's my grief. This is where my grief lies. And I'm praying that by the comfort and courage that the Holy Spirit brings, that you would do that today before you leave. If you keep reading, he says, where'd you lay him? And in verse 34, they say, come and see, Lord. Then it says, Jesus wept. They say it's the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. What's going on in this verse? I came down off the stage last week 10:30 service, I saw John talking to two of our buddies from high school. And as I got closer, I could see that they were moved to tears. As I got even closer, I saw one of them, he had taken his glasses off, and he's like, man, it sure is dusty in here. We had a good laugh. Now, I know Jesus was traveling with them down a dusty road, but I don't think that's what was going on with Jesus in this moment. In this story, we see that not only are those grieving weeping, but Jesus is weeping. And it's interesting, in the original text, there's two words used, one for their weeping and one for his. There, the word used is to describe this deep anguish and grief. But to describe his, it's this mild, sympathetic sorrow. The second thing that Jesus does is he feels for you. Right? He walks with you, but he also feels for you. All at once, the King of Kings, knowing that he was about to raise someone back to life from the grave. And in doing so, was going to glorify his Father in heaven. And in doing so, was going to comfort those he was grieving, said, time out. And he paused and he stopped to feel what they were grieving, to feel what they were feeling. And he wept. This is important. Jesus is not asking you, where does your grief lie? So that his very next move will be to fix your situation. He may, and he may not. He's asking you because his very next move is actually to feel your sorrow. That's what he wants to do first. In January, as I began to talk to God about my grief, the emotion that I had was anger. Maybe you could relate, but I was just angry. And then I felt bad that I was angry, because I know other people in my life that I would say are grieving worse things, and so I felt bad about what I was grieving. And it just made my anger worse. And then Randy asked me one of the most helpful questions I've ever been asked. He said, do you believe God can handle your grief? Do you believe God can handle your anger? And at the time I said, yes, but I don't think he should have to. I'm good. He's busy. I don't think he should have to. But as I continued to talk to God and to listen to God, it became very clear to me by the power of the Holy Spirit that yes, he can handle it, but that he wanted to. And he wasn't mad at me for being angry. In fact, he was angry with me, and he was angry for me. He walks with you and he feels for you. If we keep reading, pick it up in verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. The third thing that Jesus does in our grief is he works in you. He works in you. This is the part of the story that spoke to me probably more than any other. It just, those words, take the stone away, just leapt off the page. Jesus, who was about to literally bring someone back to life, okay, don't forget that. He's about to bring somebody back to life, could have waved his hand at the stone, rolled it away. And that would have been a footnote in the story. But instead, he did what he always does, and he actually engaged the people in their grief. And he invited them to be a part of the work that he was about to do. We see throughout the entire gospel narrative that Jesus doesn't and he won't force himself or his ways upon you. What we see in the story of Jesus is that he always shows up when we invite him. And not only does he always show up, but he shows up with an invitation of his own. And I'm telling you that invitation is 100% of the time an invitation to surrender. It's never anything different. He walks with you, he feels what you feel, and he wants to work in you, and he's asking you, are you willing to take away the stone? Are you willing to take away the stone? I don't know what your stone is. Your stone might be doubt when it comes to your grief. If I move the stone, I don't know what God's going to do. Can I trust him? If I'm vulnerable enough to just let him in and tell him about this, what's he going to do with it? I mean, just look at the story. Think about the guys who actually did the work to move the stone. How bold of a move that was, not knowing, is Jesus going to just walk away? What's he going to do? Maybe your stone is control, and you're managing, and it's working. You kind of like it. You would say you're handling it. Martha, in the story, the very next verse, Jesus is like, take away the stone. She's like, whoa, are you sure? He's been in there 4 days. It could smell. It's literally in there. And you could just see Martha in that. She's like just trying to grasp for control of the situation. Maybe that's you. Maybe your stone is weariness. You're just, frankly, beat up, beat down. You're tired. Like, Jesus, I know you're inviting me to work through the stone. I don't want to. I don't have anything left in me. You got to do it. I don't know what your stone is. For me, it was control, as I alluded to a couple minutes ago. I just thought that if I could just work and strategize, we would get back what was lost. And if I could do that, then guess what? The stone could stay. And if the stone could stay, then I could tell Jesus, hey, thanks, but I got this. I'm just going to leave the stone here. I'm handling it. Except that I wasn't. I'll never have it. I never have. If you want to know, hey, how did you do that? How did you begin to move the stone away when it came to my story? Well, it didn't happen in an instant. It took me about 6 weeks, and I don't think it's done. And it started with an instant, though. And I just prayed, and I just talked to God out loud in front of Randy as part of our conversation. And he said, all right, do it. And I know I'm a pastor, and I've been praying for 40 years, and I was like nervous to pray in front of him. This was a vulnerable moment, but I did, and I just said, God, I'm angry. And I said, God, I'm actually angry with you, if I'm really honest. And I just told him, like, I said, I miss what we had. And he did all the work, but in my honesty, I was like, I worked really hard for that. I said, I don't know why you would do that. Why would you do that? I told him again, I'm angry. And then I said, but I'm ready to begin to accept it. I'm ready to begin to surrender it. And so I said, take my anger, take my grief. I don't want it. I need your help. Let's take it. And then I just said, amen. And then I cried, which we all need to do. It's good for you. And when I was done crying, at the very least, what I had was at least a new perspective. I was just seeing things finally in a new way. I didn't get back what I lost, but I just had this new perspective. He walks with you. He feels for you. He works in you. And the last thing that he does, we can see in verse 41. So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen, his face wrapped with cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Last thing that he does is he renews through you. He renews through you. We don't know much about the life of Lazarus after that day, but a lot of people believe that he was persecuted and killed for his deep faith. But what I know you can take to the bank is that the Lazarus that Mary and Martha experienced from that day on is not the same guy that they had experienced before that day. That the version of Lazarus that went into the grave is not the one that came out. That you can know. And I know that psychiatrists, therapists, books on grief have all these different things to say, mostly helpful. But all that I know is what the gospel, the good news of Jesus says. And this is what the gospel always does. The gospel will never return you to your former life. The gospel only and always will raise you to new life. And you just got to trust me that I know that the thing that you are grieving, the thing that you lost, that it is a good thing. I also know that you didn't ask to lose it. And I wish I had an answer for that, and I don't. All I know is that the story of Jesus, the story of the good news of Jesus, is a story of death, burial, and resurrection. The following Jesus is the story of the stone being rolled away, the veil being torn, and us now with unveiled faces, as it says in 2 Corinthians, we behold his glory. And then he transforms us from one degree to another. During this dialogue with Martha, in verse 25, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. Once I came to a place of acceptance and surrender that what was Mission Church in 2020 was gone, guess what I saw next? I saw you guys. And Jesus gently reminded me that I wasn't moving on from a former thing. I was moving with him into a beautiful new thing. And I saw you guys collectively for the first time. And Jesus reminded me, yeah, I'll renew you, but I'm renewing you because I want to renew through you. And I don't know why God chose me or us, but he wants to be a part of your renewal. He wants to work in me, and I need to let him. And I can't do that if I'm going to hold on to what was, because he's putting you, a beautiful new thing, in front of me. But that's me. What about you? Because there's more yous than me in here. He's walking with you, asking you, where does your grief lie? I wonder if you would just point it out and just say, it's right here. This is it. He feels for you, everything you feel. He's inviting you to be a part of the work he wants to do. He's saying, hey, would you just take away the stone? Just let me at it. Man, I want to heal. But I know this because I know Jesus. He will not only renew you, but he wants to renew through you. This is what Jesus always does. There's people to your left and to your right within this church who he wants to renew through you, actually. There's people in your neighborhood, your gym, your workplace where you hang out that Jesus wants to renew through you. There's people in your home under your own roof that Jesus wants to renew, and he wants to do it through you. This is the new that I don't want you to say at the end of the year that you never knew. That's it. That you missed out on the renewal of others. Jesus is not inviting you to move on from your former thing. He's inviting you to move with him to a new thing. And in case that didn't sink in, let me just say it again. He is not asking you to move on from a former thing. He is lovingly, gently inviting you to move with him to the new thing he has for you. He will go with you your way. He will go with you at your pace. He just wants you to know that to move with him is going to lead you to new life.